welcome, dear listener, to a place where mysteries come alive. Here, we bring you timeless tales of clever detectives, hidden motives, and unexpected twists. Whether it's the daring charm of Tommy and Tuppence, or the keen intellect of Poirot, every story invites you to think, to feel, and to solve the case. Stay curious, and welcome to Guardian of the Night Stories.
The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of the Ritz Hotel's private dining room, casting long, golden rectangles across the pale Aubusson carpet. Hercule Poirot sat at a small table near the window, his impeccably tailored gray suit catching the light, his patent leather shoes reflecting it back like dark mirrors. Before him lay an arrangement of Belgian chocolates, each one precisely aligned according to size and a small demonstration of the orderliness that governed his entire existence. The little gray cells, they appreciate harmony, he murmured to himself, selecting a chocolate with the careful deliberation of a composer choosing a single note. Captain James Hastings, his oldest and most loyal friend, occupied the chair opposite him. Hastings, though nearing 60, maintained the upright bearing of his military days. His weathered face creased with the good humor that had endeared him to Poirot for nearly 30 years. He watched his Belgian friend with amusement, a cup of tea growing cold before him. "Poirot," he said, with the familiar exasperation of long companionship, "you've been arranging those chocolates for 10 minutes. Surely they were already in perfect order." Poirot smiled, his egg-shaped head tilting slightly. "But no, my dear Hastings. Order is not merely a matter of appearance. It is a matter of logic. These chocolates, they tell a story. The arrangement reflects the mind of the confectioner, and the confectioner's mind reveals the nature of the chocolate itself. When one understands this, one understands everything. One understands chocolate," Hastings corrected gently. "Exactement." Poirot popped the selected chocolate into his mouth with evident satisfaction. "And in understanding chocolate, one understands the human heart. Both contain layers, both conceal surprises. Both." He was interrupted by the arrival of a page boy, who approached with barely concealed urgency. "Imp," the boy inquired, though his eyes had already identified him. "There is a gentleman requesting your immediate attention. He says it is a matter of considerable importance." Poirot's eyebrows rose fractionally. In the Ritz Hotel, urgent matters are as common as dust. Yet this one, he knows my name and my location. This is less common. He rose with measured grace. "Show him to the small sitting room, if you please. Captain Hastings and I will receive him there." The gentleman who awaited them proved to be a striking figure, tall, perhaps 70 years of age, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead, and the bearing of a man accustomed to authority. His suit was of excellent cut, though worn with a certain carelessness that suggested its wearer was more occupied with matters of state than sartorial perfection. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply worried. "Poirot," the gentleman said, extending his hand. "I am Sir Lionel McFadden, currently attached to the Foreign Office. I have come to you because I scarcely know where else to turn." Poirot regarded him with courteous interest. "You are troubled, monsieur. This is evident. Please, be seated. You will take tea, or perhaps something stronger." "Tea will suffice," Sir Lionel said, settling into an armchair with the careful movements of a man in physical or emotional pain. "I shall come directly to the point. Poirot, 3 days ago, I received a letter, hand-delivered to my London residence, warning me that my life was in danger. Not ordinary danger, you understand, not a common criminal enterprise. This letter bore the seal of an organization known only as the Big Four." Hastings leaned forward. "The Big Four? I've not heard of them. Nor have the vast majority of people," Sir Lionel replied grimly. "That is precisely why they are so dangerous. They are four men of extraordinary talent, influence, and malice. One controls certain financial interests in Amsterdam. Another directs intelligence operations from Moscow. A third manipulates industrial concerns throughout the Rhineland. The fourth," he paused, ... "The fourth's location and identity remain obscure, but his influence is felt everywhere. Poirot steepled his fingers beneath his chin. And why, monsieur, should this organization concern itself with your particular life? You are, if you will forgive the observation, a civil servant of middling rank. That is precisely what makes it all the more incomprehensible. Sir Lionel admitted, I have no great wealth. I hold no position of supreme political importance. And yet, he extracted a letter from his jacket pocket. ... They claim I possess something they require. A document, they say, relating to certain treaty negotiations currently being conducted in Geneva. Poirot accepted the letter, which was written in a precise, educated hand on expensive paper. To Sir Lionel You are in possession of documentation pertaining to the Geneva Accords, currently in negotiation between the British, French, and American delegations. This documentation, in its particulars regarding armament clauses, is of considerable interest to parties who do not sit at the official table. You will place said documentation in a package at the foot of Cleopatra's Needle by midnight on the 23rd of October, wrapped in brown paper and marked with the symbol of a rook. Failure to comply will result in your death and the deaths of those closest to you. We are the Big Four, and we are always aware. The letter bore no signature, only that curious symbol of rook, rendered in black ink. This, Poirot said slowly, is either the work of a remarkably organized criminal syndicate or a remarkably elaborate hoax. Tell me, monsieur, have you complied with their demands? No, Sir Lionel said firmly, I have not. The document they reference does not exist in the form they suggest. Moreover, I have never believed in capitulating to threats. However, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. However, my daughter, Miss Helen McFadden, arrived in London 2 days ago from Paris, where she has been studying art. Yesterday evening, she received a visitor, a woman, she said, bearing a message. The woman informed Helen that if I did not comply with the demands, Helen herself would be taken. The woman left behind a token Helen's locket, which was taken from her as a child, and which only our family knows about. Hastings uttered an exclamation. Blackmail of the most vicious sort. They're using his daughter as leverage. Precisely, Sir Lionel said miserably. And I am at my wit's end. I cannot approach the police without complicating matters diplomatically. The Foreign Office dare not become officially involved, as it would compromise the Geneva negotiations. And yet, I cannot stand idle while my daughter's life hangs in the balance. Poirot rose and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. You have come to me, monsieur, because you believe that I can operate outside the usual channels, that I can investigate without the cumbersome machinery of official inquiry. This is true, but it requires one thing. Complete honesty. Is there anything at all that you have not told me? Any detail, however small or seemingly irrelevant? Sir Lionel hesitated, then spoke quietly. There is one matter. It concerns my position at the Foreign Office. I am not, as I may have implied, a mere civil servant. I am, in fact, the liaison officer between our government and certain intelligence operations conducted abroad. 3 months ago, I was involved in the interception of a communicationer wireless transmission that was being sent from London to Berlin. The transmission contained what appeared to be diplomatic overtures, but from a source we could not initially identify. It took some weeks, but we eventually determined that the transmission was being sent by someone within the government itself. Treachery, Poirot murmured. Yes, but before we could identify the traitor definitively, the transmissions ceased. They simply ... stopped. It was as if the agent knew we were close. And then, 1 week ago, we discovered that a junior clerk in the Foreign Office, a man named Pettigrew, had disappeared. He has not been seen since, and preliminary investigation suggests he may have been the source of the transmissions. And you believe, Poirot said, turning back to face him, that this matter of Pettigrew and the Big Four are connected. I cannot be certain, Sir Lionel admitted, but the timing troubles me. The disappearance of Pettigrew followed almost immediately by the threat against my life and my daughter's. It seems too coincidental. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. The little gray cells, they do not believe in coincidence, monsieur. Coincidence is what occurs when we have insufficient information. Very well. I shall undertake your case. But I must speak with your daughter, and I must examine the note left by the visitor. Moreover, you will continue your ordinary life exactly as you would have done, with no change in routine. The Big Four, whoever they are, will be observing you closely. And my daughter's safety, Sir Lionel asked anxiously, will be my paramount concern, Poirot assured him. But we will not save her by panic. We will save her by understanding. And to understand the Big Four, we must first understand what they truly want. That evening, Poirot and Hastings were received at Sir Lionel's townhouse in Belgravia, a handsome Georgian residence of a sort that speaks of old money and older respectability. Miss Helen McFadyen awaited them in the drawing room, a graceful young woman of perhaps 25 years, with her father's intelligent eyes and a delicate beauty that seemed to have been refined by continental living. "M. Poirot," she said, extending her hand, "Father has explained that you will be taking charge of this dreadful business. I confess I am relieved. These past days have been most unsettling." "I trust, mademoiselle, that you have come to no physical harm?" Poirot inquired, settling into a chair with his characteristic precision. "None whatsoever," Helen assured him. "The woman who visited me was quite polite. In fact, that is perhaps what made it all the more sinister. There was no threatening tone in her manner, merely a statement of fact, delivered as one might comment upon the weather. She said, 'Your father is being asked to provide something of value. If he does so, you will be released unharmed. If he does not, you will be brought to a place where you will be held until he reconsiders, just like that. Released, as if I were a commodity.' And this woman describe her, if you please." Helen considered carefully. She was perhaps 40 or 45 years of age, blonde, though I suspect the color was not natural. She wore a dark suit of expensive tailoring, and her accent was not English. I would say European, but precisely which nationality I could not determine. She moved with a certain military bearing, as if she had been trained to stand, to walk, in a precise manner. "Did she give you her name?" "She called herself simply Madame Corinne, though I have no reason to believe this was her true name." Poirot nodded to Hastings, who was making notes. "And the locket wears it now." Helen retrieved a small gold locket from a side table. It was exquisitely wrought, bearing the initials HM and flowing script. Inside were two miniatures, one of Sir Lionel as a young man, the other of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Helen. "This was taken from you as a child?" Poirot asked. "Yes, I was perhaps 6 years old. We were staying in Nice, and I wandered from the promenade where my mother was sitting. A man, a stranger, asked me to help him find his way. When I took his hand, he simply walked away with me. I remember being quite frightened, and then," Helen's voice grew distant, ... "and then there was only darkness. And when I woke, I was in a train compartment, and the man was gone. The locket was gone as well. A porter found me and alerted the authorities. There was a great fuss, naturally, and I was returned to my parents. No one ever knew what had happened, or why the man had taken me. It was decided that I had been sleepwalking, that I had wandered away myself and gotten lost." "But you do not believe this," Poirot observed. "I have never believed it," Helen said quietly. "I remember the man's face quite clearly. He was not attempting to help me find a street. He was deliberately taking me somewhere. It was an abduction, M. Poirot. My father's offices never found any evidence of this, and eventually the matter was closed. But I have never forgotten." Poirot turned the locket over in his hands, his expression thoughtful. "This incident had occurred when, nearly 20 years ago, I was 6 years old, so that would make it 1906, and no ransom demand was made. No message from the abductor. Nothing," Sir Lionel said. "It was as if the man simply vanished with Helen, and then changed his mind and abandoned her. The assumption was that he was a lunatic of some sort, or perhaps someone of compromised mental faculties, or," Poirot said quietly, "someone who had a very particular purpose in mind, and that purpose was defeated by the prompt discovery of his crime." He handed the locket back to Helen. "Tell me, Mademoiselle, do you have any memory of where the train took you? Any detail? however small. Helen closed her eyes, concentrating. I remember the sound of the sea. We were very near the coast, I think, and there was a factory of some sort. I remember the smell of industrial machinery, and I remember a man's voice. He was speaking to someone outside my compartment. He said something in French about the wrong child, and we will have to try again next month. And then there was shouting, and doors slamming. And when I opened my eyes, a porter was there. Poirot and Hastings exchanged a glance. The wrong child, Poirot repeated softly. A most suggestive phrase, mademoiselle. It implies that some other child was intended, but intended for what purpose? That, Sir Lionel said heavily, is what I have been asking myself for nearly 20 years. Over the following hour, Poirot conducted a careful interview with both father and daughter, extracting every detail that might prove relevant. He learned that Sir Lionel had held his position at the Foreign Office for 12 years, having previously served in military intelligence during the Boer War. Helen had spent the last 3 years studying painting in Paris. Supported by an allowance from her father, she had been courted by 2 gentlemen, a French nobleman of questionable finances, and an English major in the army, but had accepted neither. It occurs to me, Poirot said, as the evening drew to a close, that this matter of the Big Four may be less about the Geneva Accords and more about something far older and more personal. The resurrection of the locket, mademoiselle, is not a coincidence. It is a message. Someone is reminding your family that they have the capacity to strike at those you hold most dear. But why? Helen asked, her voice distressed. Why should they wait nearly 20 years to do so? That, Poirot said, is the question to which we must find an answer. And I believe, mademoiselle, that the answer lies not here in London, but on the continent. You mentioned a French nobleman who courted you. Who is this gentleman? Monsieur Philippe Valadou, Helen said. His family owns vineyards in Burgundy. He is a charming man, though perhaps not entirely trustworthy with matters of finance. And you refused his suit. I did. His intentions seemed honorable, but his circumstances were ... uncertain. I could not commit my life to a man whose financial position might collapse at any moment. Poirot rose. I believe, Sir Lionel, that I shall require access to certain records personnel files at the Foreign Office, in particular those relating to the late Mr. Pettigrew. Moreover, I should like to examine the wireless installation where the transmission to Berlin was intercepted, and I must ask a favor of you regarding your daughter. Anything, Sir Lionel said. I should like Miss Helen to accept an invitation from a friend of mine, the Countess de Torquay, who resides in the south of France. It will be presented as a social engagement, nothing more, but in reality, Miss Helen will be far from London, and therefore beyond the reach of those who might wish to harm her. Your daughter will be watched over by individuals of considerable discretion and ability. Sir Lionel hesitated. You believe Helen is in genuine danger? I believe, Poirot said carefully, that those who took Miss Helen 20 years ago have not forgotten her, and I believe that they intend to use her as a lever against you. The best protection is prevention. By removing her from London, we remove their weapon. Helen placed a hand on her father's arm. Father, I trust M. Poirot's judgment. If this will help bring this matter to an end, I will go. Over the following days, while Helen was discreetly conveyed to the south of France under the protection of Countess de Torquay, Poirot began his investigation in earnest. Captain Hastings observed with his usual admiration as his friend moved through the corridors of the Foreign Office, examining files, speaking with clerks and senior officials, noting details that others would have dismissed as irrelevant. The matter of Pettigrew proved particularly interesting. The man had been a clerk of unremarkable abilities, known to be discreet and diligent, but with no particular ambitions for advancement. His disappearance had been noted only when he failed to report for duty 3 consecutive days. His flat in Bloomsbury was found to be in perfect order, with no signs of struggle or forced entry. His bank account, modest though it was, had not been touched. It was as if the man had simply ceased to exist. Observe, Poirot said to Hastings, as they stood in the small office where Pettigrew had worked. This deskit is neat, is it not? Too neat. A man who disappears suddenly, without warning, does not leave his workspace in perfect order. He leaves hastily. Perhaps there would be a cup of tea cold upon the saucer, or a letter begun but not finished. But this is the tidiness of a man who intended to be gone for some time. You mean he was sent away? Hastings asked. By his superior, perhaps, or by something far less official. Poirot replied. He opened the drawers of the desk, examining their contents with meticulous care. Here a personal diary. Most individuals in Pettigrew's position would take such a thing with them, or destroy it. Yet it remains. Why? Hastings looked at the diary, a slim brown leather volume. Perhaps he thought it too commonplace to matter. Or, Poirot said, it is a diary that contains nothing of significance. A blind, as they say in detective work. A thing left deliberately to suggest normality where abnormality had already begun. He opened it at random and scanned the entries. See, weather fine. Took my breakfast at the usual cafe. Meeting with M secretary postponed to Friday. Nothing of consequence. Yet men who lead double lives often maintain such innocent records precisely to maintain appearances. By the end of the week, Poirot had uncovered a curious pattern. Pettigrew had been in contact, through seemingly innocent channels, with several individuals of foreign descent who worked in minor capacities within London's diplomatic and commercial circles. A secretary at the German embassy, a clerk at a shipping company with Dutch connections, a translator employed by a firm that handled trade agreements with Eastern Europe. The Big Four, Poirot mused to Hastings one evening as they sat in the sitting room of Poirot's flat. They do not recruit their agents carelessly. They choose individuals who are already positioned within systems of importance, but who are themselves insignificant enough that their comings and goings would pass unnoticed. Pettigrew was such a man, but the question remains, why did they recruit him, and where has he gone? Perhaps he's been eliminated, Hastings suggested grimly. Once he'd served his purpose. It is possible, Poirot acknowledged, but I think not. If they had wished him dead, they would not have made his disappearance so clean, so organized. No, I believe Pettigrew has been removed from England for a purpose. He is valuable to them, but only if he ceases to be in contact with his former life. It was at this point that a second letter arrived at Sir Lionel's residence, delivered by post to Hastings, who was spending increasing amounts of time at the house as Poirot's representative. The letter was brief. Sir Lionel, we note that your daughter has left England. We are aware of her destination and her protectors. You have made a move we did not anticipate. The deadline for the provision of the documents has therefore been extended by 1 week, with the following modification. You will attend a diplomatic reception at the Austrian embassy. On the evening of November 2nd, you will be contacted there with further instructions. Failure to attend, or any attempt to involve the police or military, will result in an unfortunate accident occurring to your daughter in the south of France. We watch, we wait. We always know. The Big Four. The receipt of this letter threw Sir Lionel into a state of considerable agitation. It suggested, he lamented, that their opponents were not operating from distant sources, but had agents actively engaged in London, even as they spoke. Moreover, the knowledge of Helen's location raised a terrifying possibility that even the Countess's protection might prove insufficient. No, Poirot said firmly, when Sir Lionel expressed these fears. On the contrary, this letter is evidence of their weakness, not their strength. They claim to know where Miss Helen is, yet they have not acted. Why? Because the information they possess is not current. They know she has left England. They do not know precisely where she has gone. The Countess has taken considerable precautions to ensure her safety, and I have arranged for additional security of which you are unaware. But if they discover, Poirot interrupted gently, we will have learned something of considerable importance, the extent and nature of their intelligence network. But I do not believe they will discover. Instead, I believe they will proceed with their plan to contact you at the Austrian embassy, and at that point, we shall discover who these mysterious four are and what they truly wish. And if this is a trap, Sir Lionel asked quietly. Then Poirot said, with a small smile, it will prove to be a trap of their own making, and it is the maker of traps who most often falls into them. The night of November 2nd arrived with the sort of dreary, drizzling London weather that seems to settle into one's bones and persist for weeks. The Austrian embassy, a handsome mansion in Belgrave Square, was ablaze with light as guests arrived for the reception. Poirot, accompanied by Hastings and a discreet individual of their acquaintance named Blake, who worked in the diplomatic service, arrived at 9:30. Sir Lionel had been instructed to attend at the specified hour, alone, but with a small and particular signal in his Pokita playing card, the rook from a standard deck, which Poirot believed would identify him to whoever was meant to make contact. The Big Four will not attempt anything tonight of a violent nature, Poirot explained, as they moved through the reception rooms. To do so in such a public place would be foolish and would draw exactly the sort of attention they wish to avoid. Instead, they will make contact, issue instructions, and observe how Sir Lionel responds. They wish to judge his willingness to comply. The reception was well attended. Diplomats and their wives, a sprinkling of society hostesses, and the usual assembly of minor officials and hopeful businessmen who attend such functions. Poirot moved through the crowd with his characteristic aloofness, observing everything while appearing to notice nothing in particular. At precisely 10 o'clock, a woman entered the reception room, the same woman, Blake quietly informed them, whom the Austrian diplomatic staff had noticed 2 weeks earlier in conversation with one of the embassy's junior officials. She was dressed impeccably in sapphire silk, her blonde hair arranged in the latest fashion. She wore diamonds that caught the light and scattered it across the assembled company like scattered stars. Madame Corinne, Poirot breathed to Hastings as Poirot watched. The woman made her way through the crowd with practiced ease until she came within a few feet of Sir Lionel. For a moment, she simply stood beside him, apparently admiring the same painting that had captured his attention. Then, with a movement so subtle that none watching could have detected it, she transferred a small white envelope from her hand to his pocket. The contact lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then Madame Corinne moved away, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and engaged in animated conversation with the Austrian ambassador's wife. "She has delivered her message," Poirot said quietly. "Now we shall see what Sir Lionel does. But first, we must determine who this woman truly is, and who employs her." Sir Lionel, following Poirot's instructions to the letter, made no move to examine the envelope immediately. He remained at the reception for another hour, engaging in ordinary conversation, accepting refreshments, appearing entirely at ease. Only when he had returned to his residence did he, in the presence of Poirot and Hastings, open the envelope. Inside was a single typewritten page. "Sir Lionel, you have proven yourself capable of following instructions. This is encouraging. We have a proposition for you. The documents you are presumed to possess, while of interest to us, are not in fact our primary objective. What we require is your cooperation in a matter of some delicacy. Specifically, we require your assistance in removing one individual from England, a man of no great importance to your government, but of considerable importance to us. His name is Peter Macpherson. He currently resides in a nursing home in Tunbridge Wells. You will arrange for his transfer to a private hospital of our designation, where he will receive the medical care we have arranged for him. In exchange, Miss Helen will be released unharmed, and your daughter's life will be forever safe from our attention. We are not unreasonable men, Sir Lionel. We are businessmen, pursuing our business. This matter is business, nothing more." "The Big Four, good Lord," Hastings exclaimed. "They want you to aid in the removal of a patient from a nursing home. That's kidnapping." "No," Poirot said thoughtfully. "It is something far more subtle. Observe the phrasing, removal rather than kidnapping, and the matter is presented as a medical transfer, if handled with proper discretion. If the appropriate paperwork were falsified, such a transfer might occur entirely within the bounds of apparent legality. The question is, who is this Peter Macpherson, and why do the Big Four wish to secure him?" That very evening, Poirot sent Blake to make inquiries regarding Peter Macpherson. The man's background proved remarkable in its ordinariness. A retired engineer, aged 70, who had spent his life in industrial concerns throughout Europe and Asia. 5 years prior, he had suffered a stroke, which had left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak coherently. He had been placed in the Sycamore Rest Home in Tunbridge Wells, where he had remained under the care of his nephew, who paid for his maintenance. A man of no importance, Hastings murmured, reading Blake's report. An invalid, unable even to speak. Why would the Big Four concern themselves with him? Because Poirot said, he was not always of no importance. 50 years ago, when he was young and vigorous, this Peter Macpherson was very much a man of significance. He was, I suspect, involved in matters that the Big Four believe should remain hidden. A stroke has rendered him mute and powerless. And here is the crucial point: it has not rendered him dead, and a man who could talk, if somehow his condition were reversed, might become quite problematic indeed. You mean they wish to ensure his silence permanently? Hastings asked, his face darkening with comprehension. I mean precisely that, Poirot confirmed. They wish Sir Lionel to arrange for Macpherson's transfer to their facility, where they can be certain that his silence is eternal. It is murder, mon ami, but murder of the most sophisticated sort, one that would appear to the world as merely a change of nursing care, a failure of a weakened heart, the inevitable result of advanced age. Hastings rose, pacing with agitation. Then we must inform the authorities at once. We must protect Macpherson. We shall, Poirot assured him, but not in the manner you suggest. If we alert the local police, or the nursing home, we will accomplish nothing but to force the Big Four to attempt their purpose through other means. They have agents throughout England. They will simply seek another method. No, we must instead allow them to believe their plan is proceeding according to design, while simultaneously ensuring that it cannot possibly succeed. It was at this precise moment that a knock came at the door, urgent and insistent. Blake entered, his face grave. Sir, he said to Poirot, I have just received word from our contact in Tunbridge Wells. Peter Macpherson has been found dead in his room. The nursing home staff report that he simply did not wake this morning. The attending physician has attributed his death to cardiac failure, which is entirely plausible given his condition. However, Blake paused. The timing is rather remarkable, given our current investigation. The room fell silent. Poirot's face remained tranquil, but his eyes grew cold and sharp as diamonds. Remarkable indeed, he said quietly. The Big Four have grown impatient. Or perhaps they simply wanted to ensure that Sir Lionel would be sufficiently motivated to comply. Either way, they have now committed a most serious error. Peter Macpherson was of interest to them. This means he was known to them, observed by them, perhaps communicated with, and this, in turn, means that there exists somewhere a connection between him and one of the four. We must now discover what that connection is. The death of Peter Macpherson accelerated Poirot's investigation considerably. With Blake's assistance, he secured copies of the nursing home records, the medical reports, and the details of Macpherson's visitors over the past 5 years. The results proved illuminating. For the first 3 years of Macpherson's residence, he had received regular visits from his nephew, a gentleman named Robert Macpherson, who lived in London and worked in the city's financial sector. But 18 months prior, these visits had ceased abruptly. In their place, a woman had begun to visit, identified in the records only as Miss Catherine Wells, who claimed to be a distant relation. She had called twice monthly with unfailing regularity, though the nursing home staff reported that she had rarely remained more than half an hour and had never been observed conversing with the patient beyond simple pleasantries. But observe, Poirot said to Hastings, pointing to a notation in the staff log. This woman always visited at precisely 2 in the afternoon and always departed by 1:30. She was consistent, methodical. This is not the behavior of a woman visiting an elderly relation out of familial obligation. This is the behavior of a woman conducting business. The description of Miss Catherine Wells, approximately 50 years of age, dark-haired, of French or Central European appearance, speaking English with a slight accent, matched no criminal record in Scotland Yard's files. However, Blake's inquiries produced a curious result. and woman of that name had been involved in a minor incident in Brussels 15 years prior, in connection with a matter of alleged document forgery. The charges had been dropped, and Miss Wells had subsequently vanished from public record. She is, I believe, one of the four, or a trusted agent of the four, Poirot concluded. But which of the four she serves, and from whence she derives her instructions, remains to be determined. Meanwhile, Sir Lionel had been instructed by Poirot to respond to the Big Four's demands with apparent compliance. A letter had been drafted, expressing his willingness to arrange Macpherson's transfer, and explaining that certain procedural delays had prevented him from doing so immediately, delays which would now, he assured them, be overcome. The letter was placed in a dead drop, a technique of espionage which Poirot had arranged through Blake's Foreign Office connections. 3 days later, a response arrived, delivered again through the post to Sir Lionel's residence. Sir Lionel, we note with satisfaction your apparent willingness to cooperate. However, your delays grow tiresome. The transfer of Peter Macpherson must occur before the week's end. To ensure your compliance, we have arranged a small reminder of our sincerity. Look to the evening edition of the London Times section on Continental Business Reports. You will understand our meaning. The Big Four with trembling hands. Sir Lionel obtained the Times. It took some minutes to locate the relevant passage, buried deep in the financial pages. The Valence Textile Company, which has maintained factories in Lyon for the past 50 years, has announced its sudden closure due to what representatives described as unforeseen difficulties in supply lines. The closure will result in the unemployment of some 200 workers. Shares in the company, previously valued at 4 shillings, have plummeted to 1/2 D in morning trading. The company's primary shareholder, the Burgundy Collective, has issued a statement indicating that they were unable to prevent the closure. Sources suggest that certain of the collective's investments in Eastern Europe may have become ... problematic. The Burgundy Collective, Poirot murmured. Is this not the organization which holds the majority interest in Monsieur Valadou's wine estates? It is, Sir Lionel confirmed. I made inquiries regarding young Valadou when Helen mentioned him. The McFadden family has interests in that region. As well, we own some small properties in Burgundy, acquired decades ago. The Burgundy Collective emerged perhaps 5 years ago as a consolidating force, gradually acquiring various vineyards and agricultural concerns. And now, Poirot said, we see that this collective possesses the means and the inclination to destroy businesses that do not comply with their wishes. This is more than simple commerce, monsieur. This is the activity of an organization that is willing to employ economic warfare to achieve its objectives. I believe the collective is a front, a business entity controlled by one of the four. It was Blake, however, who provided the crucial breakthrough. Through his connections in the diplomatic service, he was able to identify the principal investors in the Burgundy Collective. 3 men, all of significant wealth and European prominence. One was a Dutch financier based in Amsterdam, known for his aggressive and often questionable business practices. Another was a German industrial magnate whose factories provided essential materials to various European governments. The third was a Russian immigrant who had amassed considerable fortune through shipping concerns. The 3 of the 4, Poirot breathed. A Dutchman, a German, and a Russian. And the fourth, who is the fourth? He must be the most dangerous, the most hidden. Perhaps someone in England, Hastings suggested. Someone who has remained entirely in the shadows. Or, Poirot said thoughtfully, someone so obviously before the public eye that no one would think to suspect him. The greatest trick of the criminal mind is not to conceal itself, but to place itself in plain sight, so that it appears to be something entirely innocent. As November progressed, the investigation began to reveal a most complex and disturbing network of intrigue. The Big Four, it became clear, were not primarily concerned with the theft of government documents or the removal of inconvenient patients from nursing homes. These were merely tools, mechanisms to achieve a far greater objective: the consolidation of power across European commercial and industrial sectors, achieved through a combination of bribery, blackmail, and strategic economic warfare. Peter Macpherson's death, when examined more closely, proved to be precisely what it appeared to be: a natural death, hastened, perhaps, by certain undetectable toxins, but natural nonetheless in its outward appearance. Yet it served a purpose far greater than the elimination of a troublesome invalid. It sent a message. The Big Four were willing to eliminate those who could not be controlled or leveraged. It was a demonstration of their reach, their ruthlessness, and their determination. Sir Lionel had been targeted not because he possessed any particular documents of value, but because he occupied a position that could be useful to them. Through him, they could potentially acquire advance warning of British diplomatic initiatives. Through his daughter, they could ensure his compliance. Through Peter Macpherson's death, they could demonstrate what awaited him if he refused to cooperate. "It is perfectly orchestrated," Poirot explained to Hastings, as they sat in Sir Lionel's library reviewing the accumulated evidence. "Each element serves multiple purposes. The threat to Miss Helen serves to motivate her father. The demand for Macpherson's transfer serves to test Sir Lionel's willingness to commit a crime, thus binding him to them through complicity. The economic destruction of the Valence Company serves to demonstrate their power and to ensure compliance from other business interests they have infiltrated. And beneath it all, there is the systematic acquisition of influence over key figures in commerce, government, and finance across 3 nations." "But to what purpose?" Hastings asked. "What is the end game? Surely, mere wealth and influence cannot be sufficient motivation for such elaborate schemes." "Ah," Poirot said, "you assume that wealth and influence are the objective, but I believe they are merely the means. The objective is something far more ambitious: the ability to shape policy, to influence governments, to make wars or prevent them according to the dictates of a small group of men pursuing their own agenda." It was at this point that Hastings received a message from the Countess de Torquay in the south of France. Helen McFadden had been approached by a gentleman who claimed to be a representative of a French business concern interested in acquiring some of her father's Burgundy properties. The man had been polite, well-dressed, and had offered a sum considerably above the current market value. When Helen had declined, politely but firmly, the man had departed without protest, but not before leaving behind a piece of jewelry, a small black rook, identical in design to the symbol that had appeared on the Big Four's letters. "They are closing in," Hastings said grimly. "Or," Poirot replied, "they are growing desperate. The rook left for Miss Helen is not a threat, it is a reminder. It tells her that they are aware of her location, aware of her existence, aware of her vulnerability, despite the protection surrounding her. But it also tells us something of considerable importance. They have become careless. They no longer believe they must hide their activities entirely. They are confident, perhaps overconfident, that they are beyond the reach of justice." Over the following days, Poirot embarked on a course of action that seemed to Hastings almost reckless. He arranged for Blake to forward to the British Foreign Office detailed information regarding the Big Four's commercial operations, the Burgundy Collective, the Amsterdam Financial House, the German industrial concerns, the Russian shipping enterprise. He ensured that this information reached not merely the desk of a single official, but was distributed to diplomatic representatives in France, Germany, and Russia. He arranged for certain financial irregularities to be brought to the attention of relevant authorities, creating the sort of bureaucratic complications that would make continued large-scale operations increasingly difficult. "But surely this will simply drive them deeper underground," Hastings protested, "or cause them to strike out more violently." "Possibly," Poirot acknowledged, "but we are not yet ready for a final confrontation. First, we must draw out the 4th member of their organization. The Dutchman, the German, and the Russian. These men are known quantities, their activities traceable through commercial records and official channels. But the fourth remains invisible. And it is the 4th, I believe, who is the true architect of this conspiracy." It was Blake who provided the crucial piece of intelligence. Through careful investigation of the Vienna-based intermediaries, who had arranged certain financial transactions connected to the Big Four's operation, Blake had identified a curious pattern: regular payments made to an account held by a gentleman named Edward Carmichael, listed as a consultant to various European business concerns. Carmichael, Hastings breathed, recognizing the name. The fellow is a member of Parliament, isn't he? I've seen him at social functions. Unremarkable sort, keeps to himself, known for having substantial private interests outside of his parliamentary duties. Poirot's eyes glinted with the light of recognition. Edward Carmichael, he repeated slowly, the fourth of the four. A man in plain sight, a gentleman of apparently modest importance, whose position in Parliament provides him with access to confidential information and the opportunity to influence policy from within. This is most elegant. Nest C. The revelation of Carmichael's identity set in motion the final phase of Poirot's strategy. Rather than attempting to arrest him or expose him through official channels, Poirot instead arranged a most singular gathering. He sent invitations to Sir Lionel, to Blake, to a Scotland Yard inspector named Morrison, with whom he had worked on previous cases, and to one additional guest, the Countess de Torquay, who had traveled from the south of France, bringing with her Miss Helen McFadden. The gathering was to take place on the evening of November 15th, in Sir Lionel's drawing room. But before the guests arrived, Poirot conducted a careful examination of the room with Hastings, placing certain items in specific positions, instructing the servants regarding the management of the doors, and ensuring that the arrangements of furniture provided clear sight lines for all observers. "What is it that you intend?" Hastings asked, watching these preparations with mystification. "I intend," Poirot said, "to place a mirror before them, a mirror in which they will see themselves reflected, and in that reflection, they will see the truth. Once they see the truth, they cannot escape it. Conscience, my dear Hastings, is a far more effective prison than any cell of stone and steel." That evening, as the clock on the mantelpiece approached 8 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Sir Lionel came first, his face pale but resolved. Blake arrived with Inspector Morrison, a solid, competent man of some 50 years, whose career in Scotland Yard had been marked by methodical persistence rather than brilliant inspiration. The Countess de Torquay entered with Helen, whose beauty seemed to have grown more striking through the fear and uncertainty she had endured. And then, precisely at 8 o'clock, there came a knock at the door, and Sir Lionel's butler announced the arrival of Mr. Edward Carmichael. Carmichael was a man of perhaps 60 years, with the bearing of someone of considerable social standing. His gray suit was of excellent cut, his manner courteous and composed. To any observer, he appeared to be nothing more than a distinguished gentleman accepting a social invitation. Only in his eyes was there any indication of the calculating intelligence that lay beneath the surface. Poirot greeted him with warmth that seemed entirely genuine. "Mr. Carmichael, I am delighted that you have accepted Sir Lionel's invitation. I have taken the liberty of requesting your presence this evening for a matter of some delicacy. Will you join us?" Carmichael settled into a chair with careful grace. "I confess myself curious, M. Poirot. Sir Lionel indicated that you wished to speak with me regarding certain matters of a financial nature. I must say, the summons was somewhat unexpected, though not entirely unwelcome. I have been aware for some time that you were investigating the affairs of certain commercial interests in which I possess a minor investment." "Ah," Poirot said, "so you have been watching us, just as you have been watching so many others. This is clever, Mr. Carmichael, very clever indeed. It allows you to remain aware of the movements of those who might pose a threat to your designs." "I'm afraid I don't follow," Carmichael said smoothly, though his eyes had grown watchful. Poirot rose and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. "You represent what I have come to think of as a particular type of criminal mind, Mr. Carmichael. Not the crude criminal who kills because of passion or steals because of poverty. No, you are a man of intellect, of patience, of long-term vision. You have spent years, perhaps decades, cultivating your network, building your web of influence. And all of this you have accomplished while maintaining your position as a respected member of Parliament, a gentleman of affairs, a man of apparent virtue and integrity." "These are interesting observations," Carmichael said, "but they remain observations only. You have no evidence." "On the contrary," Poirot said, "I have a great deal of evidence. But more importantly, Mr. Carmichael, I have something that evidence cannot provide. Understanding. You see, I have been attempting to comprehend why a man of your intelligence and position would involve himself in such elaborate schemes of extortion and conspiracy. And I believe I have finally understood. It is not merely about power or wealth. It is about something far more personal. He turned to face Carmichael directly. 20 years ago, a child was abducted in Nice. A little girl named Helen McFadden. The abduction was orchestrated by yourself and your associates, the Big Four. But something went wrong. The child was discovered and returned. The abduction failed. Helen, watching from across the room, went very pale. Sir Lionel made an involuntary movement toward her, but the Countess steadied him with a glance. You see, Mr. Carmichael Poirot continued, you and your associates are not simply criminals pursuing wealth and influence. You are ideologues, believers in a vision of European order that you believe can be imposed through the strategic manipulation of commerce and politics. And to achieve this vision, you require certain tools, individuals who can be controlled, information that can be leveraged, governments that can be influenced. Young Miss Helen would have been such a tool. A girl raised in a particular manner, trained in certain ways, could have become an instrument of extraordinary value to your cause. This is pure speculation, Carmichael said, but his voice had grown harder, less certain. Perhaps, Poirot acknowledged, but consider, the abduction failed, yet you did not abandon your designs. Instead, you waited, you observed, and when the opportunity arose, when Miss Helen grew older, when Sir Lionel achieved a position of some significance in the government, you decided to make use of her in a different manner. You would use her as leverage to control her father. Inspector Morrison, listening intently, leaned forward. The letters, he said suddenly, the threatening letters signed by the Big Four, were written by Mr. Carmichael himself. Poirot confirmed. Not directly, of course. He employed intermediaries, but each letter, each threat, each demonstration of power, all were orchestrated by the man sitting before us. You cannot prove this, Carmichael said, rising to his feet. You have suspicions, conjectures, the product of an overactive imagination. My solicitor will shred any case you attempt to construct. Undoubtedly, Poirot agreed. The law, with all its procedural complexity and evidentiary requirements, may well prove insufficient to hold you. But there is another force at work here, Mr. Carmichael. There is truth, and truth, once acknowledged, cannot be escaped through legal maneuvering or parliamentary privilege. Poirot moved toward a small table upon which several objects had been carefully arranged. The threatening letters, the locket taken from Helen years before, a photograph of Peter McPherson, financial records, and a single playing card, the rook from the deck. The Big Four, Poirot began, addressing not merely Carmichael, but the assembled company, represent four centers of power: commerce, industry, politics, and finance. The Dutch financier controls vast sums of money, moving capital across Europe with such subtlety that governments scarcely notice. The German industrialist controls production, the creation of goods and materials essential to modern societies. The Russian shipping magnate controls distribution and logistics, and Mr. Carmichael controls information and political will. Together, they believed they could reshape the continent. He picked up the locket, but their plan was not merely about present power. It was about establishing a dynasty of control that would extend into future generations. Miss Helen, you see, was to be their instrument, raised from childhood to believe she was an orphan, educated according to their specifications, placed strategically through marriage or position into key family. She would have become their legacy. The abduction failed. Blake interjected, following Poirot's reasoning. When Helen was found, they couldn't retrieve her, so they abandoned that plan and waited for another opportunity. Precisely, Poirot confirmed, and when Sir Lionel achieved his position in the Foreign Office, they saw a new possibility. They could leverage Helen's life to control her father, and through her father, gain access to sensitive diplomatic information. Peter McPherson was eliminated because he possessed knowledge dangerous to them, knowledge, perhaps of their original plans, their ultimate objectives. Carmichael laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. You tell a compelling story in Poirot, but stories are not evidence. I am a member of Parliament, an esteemed businessman, a man whose reputation is beyond reproach. Against that reputation, your tale of international conspiracy amounts to nothing. You are correct, Poirot said quietly. As far as the law is concerned, my accusations are merely speculation. But consider what I have done, Mr. Carmichael. I have shared this information with officials in 3 countries. I have ensured that Scotland Yard and the Foreign Office are aware of the connections between yourself and the Big Four's commercial enterprises. I have provided evidence to the proper authorities regarding financial irregularities and crimes of extortion. What you face may not be swift, but it will be relentless. Your reputation, once besmirched by mere suspicion, will attract scrutiny. Where previously your financial transactions passed unnoticed, they will now be examined with meticulous care. Where previously your political influence was accepted as legitimate, it will now be viewed with suspicion. Carmichael's face had grown carefully controlled, but his knuckles had turned white as he gripped the arm of his chair. Moreover, Poirot continued, the other 3 members of your cabal are now aware that their activities have been exposed. The Amsterdam financier has had his operations disrupted by Dutch authorities. The German industrialist faces investigation from Berlin. The Russian shipping magnate has had his London operations frozen by government order. They will begin to suspect that one of their number has been compromised. They will suspect that you have revealed them. That's preposterous, Carmichael said. I would never. They will suspect it, Poirot repeated calmly, because it is in their nature to suspect. Men such as yourselves build your empires on mutual distrust and calculated betrayal. When things begin to fall apart, the first instinct is to blame one's associates. You will find yourselves isolated, Mr. Carmichael, cut off from the network of support that has sustained your power. And in that isolation, perhaps you will begin to understand the error of your ways. Sir Lionel moved forward, his voice shaking with emotion. My daughter. You used my daughter as a pawn in your elaborate game. You threatened her life, caused her terror, all for the sake of your ambitions. Did you truly believe such things could be done without consequence? Carmichael stood, his composure finally beginning to crack. The child was collateral, he said coldly, in the pursuit of larger objectives. Small sacrifices are necessary. This is the way of history, Sir Lionel. This is how empires are built. No, Poirot said, and his voice had taken on an edge of steel. This is how empires fall. The very qualities that drive men like you to calculation. The willingness to sacrifice others. The belief in your own superiority. These are the seeds of your eventual destruction. They isolate you from humanity. They blind you to the consequences of your actions. They make you predictable to those who understand the human heart. Inspector Morrison rose. Mr. Carmichael, I believe I must ask you to come with me to Scotland Yard for questioning regarding certain matters related to financial fraud and extortion. I demand that you contact my solicitor, Carmichael said, his voice now cold and formal. And I warn you that any charges brought against me will be vigorously defended. I have powerful friends, Inspector, very powerful friends. Perhaps, Morrison acknowledged, but in my experience, friends tend to disappear rather quickly when a man's situation becomes legally compromising. As Carmichael was led away, Helen rose and approached Poirot. The abduction, she said softly. The man in Nice, the one I remembered threatening to take the wrong child. That was intentional, wasn't it? I was not the intended victim. There was another child, another girl whom they meant to take. Poirot nodded gravely. Yes. I have been investigating this matter with a colleague in France. There was a family, the Thibauts, who lived in Nice at that time. They had a daughter of almost the same age as yourself. Her father was a diplomat involved in certain sensitive negotiations. The Big Four intended to abduct the Thibaut child as leverage against her father. But their agents made a mistake. They took you instead. By the time they realized their error, the authorities had already been alerted, and they were forced to abandon the child. Why didn't they try again? Helen asked. Why did they wait so long? Because, Poirot said, the Thibaut family had since moved to South America, beyond their reach, and they were patient men. Mr. Carmichael and his associates. They understood that opportunities would present themselves in time. They were willing to wait years, even decades, for the proper moment to strike. It is a form of madness, really, to be so consumed by one's ambitions that one can wait so long, plan so elaborately, for the moment when one can finally act. Over the following weeks, the machinery of justice, slow though it often is, began to move against Edward Carmichael and his associates. The investigations conducted by British, French, German, and Russian authorities, all proceeding simultaneously, created a web of legal and political complications from which even Carmichael's considerable resources could not extract him. The criminal charges brought against him were necessarily complex, involving multiple jurisdictions and the careful coordination of various authorities: money laundering, extortion, conspiracy to commit murder. Further, the list grew as investigators uncovered more of the Big Four's elaborate schemes. Some charges proved more difficult to substantiate than others, but taken together, they presented a compelling case. As Poirot had predicted, Carmichael's associates began to distance themselves from him. The Russian shipping magnate, whose operations had been disrupted by London authorities, denied any knowledge of Carmichael's activities. The German industrialist issued statements through his lawyers claiming that any business relationships with Carmichael were entirely above board and conducted according to proper commercial practice. The Dutch financier, facing investigations in Amsterdam, proved most cooperative with authorities, offering information regarding Carmichael's role in coordinating the Big Four's activities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The matter of Peter McPherson's death remained technically unsolved. The toxin used was too subtle, too difficult to trace, and the attending physician at the nursing home remained steadfast in his conclusion that the death was natural, however hastened. Yet the circumstances surrounding it, combined with the other evidence of Carmichael's activities, created a picture sufficiently damning that few observers doubted the true nature of the death. Sir Lionel's position was briefly precarious, as questions arose regarding the demands that had been made upon him, and whether his compliance or near compliance might constitute criminal activity. However, Poirot's intervention, combined with Blake's testimony as to the nature of the coercion being applied, resulted in a determination that Sir Lionel had acted as any reasonable man would have when faced with threats against his daughter's life. Helen, for her part, seemed to emerge from her ordeal with a strength and clarity that surprised those who knew her. Rather than retreating into a life of genteel domesticity, she began to involve herself in certain charitable enterprises, particularly those concerned with the protection of children and the investigation of criminal activities affecting the young and vulnerable. As for Captain Hastings, he found himself reflecting, as he had so many times before, on the remarkable qualities of his friend Hercule Poirot. "I confess," he said one evening as they sat in Poirot's flat, reviewing the case in its conclusion, "that I still do not entirely understand how you knew. The Big Four seemed so carefully hidden, so distant from ordinary investigation, yet you perceived them from the first." Poirot, arranging his chocolates with customary care, smiled. "It was not perception, my dear Hastings, but rather the application of logic. You see, when Sir Lionel first came to me, he presented a puzzle, a threat made by an organization called the Big Four. Now, an ordinary criminal would have presented his threats without such grandiosity. The very naming of themselves, the assertion of their power, the demonstrations of their reach, these are the actions of men who believe themselves to be operating on a stage grander than ordinary crime. Such men do not remain hidden indefinitely. They eventually reveal themselves through the very arrogance that drives them." "And the connection to Helen's abduction?" Hastings asked. "That came from the locket," Poirot explained. "You see, the fact that Carmichael and his associates chose to use that particular symbol, the locket from her childhood, suggested that this was not a random selection. The locket itself was ancient history, lost nearly 20 years prior. Why would they trouble themselves to resurrect it unless it had personal significance? And once I began to investigate Helen's childhood, the pattern became clear. The abduction was no accident, no random criminal act. It was a deliberate attempt to acquire a child for purposes of control and leverage. Carmichael and his associates were not merely building a criminal enterprise. They were building a dynasty of control that would extend across generations. Most chilling, Hastings said, shaking his head. And to think that such schemes might have succeeded had circumstances been slightly different. But circumstances, Poirot replied, are determined by human nature. And human nature, my dear Hastings, is remarkably consistent. Ambition breeds arrogance. Arrogance breeds carelessness. And carelessness is the fatal flaw in even the most carefully constructed scheme. Carmichael and his associates believed themselves to be above the ordinary rules of morality and law. This belief, in the end, was their undoing. It was a cold, clear evening in early December when Poirot received a visitor at his flat. The Countess de Torquay had come from her estate in the south to thank him personally for his role in resolving the matter. Miss Helen is much improved, the Countess reported. She speaks now of pursuing her art studies with renewed vigor, and Sir Lionel, though he will carry the scars of this experience, has regained much of his usual composure. Poirot received this news with evident satisfaction. He offered the Countess tea, which was prepared according to her precise specifications by his valet, and settled back in his chair. The human spirit, he observed, is far more resilient than we sometimes acknowledge. Sir Lionel and his daughter have endured a considerable trial, yet they emerge from it with their essential humanity intact. This is admirable. And what of Mr. Carmichael? The Countess inquired. I understand the trial date has been set for March. Yes, Poirot confirmed. The proceedings will be complex, involving testimony from 4 nations and legal experts from multiple jurisdictions. But the outcome seems virtually assured. Mr. Carmichael will spend his remaining years behind bars, a fate which he has richly earned. After the Countess had departed, Poirot sat alone in his flat, regarding the small collection of objects that had played roles in the case. The threatening letters, the rook playing cards, a copy of Helen's recovered locket. He arranged them according to the logic of the investigation, placing each item in its proper place, establishing the relationships between them. The little gray cells, he murmured to himself. They have done their work. Order has been restored. Justice has been served. And yet, he paused, considering the darker aspects of the case to years of careful planning. The willingness to manipulate and destroy. The belief that one man or one small group could reshape the world according to their vision. And yet, he continued softly, one understands that there will always be men like Carmichael and his associates, men who believe that they are exempt from the ordinary rules of morality, men who will devote their considerable intelligence and resources to designs that are fundamentally destructive. The struggle between order and chaos, between justice and corruption, is eternal. It is not a war that can be won, finally, conclusively. It is a war that must be fought constantly, vigilantly, without end. He selected a chocolate, particularly fine piece, filled with dark ganache and consumed it with evident satisfaction. But tonight, he said to the empty room, tonight the forces of order have prevailed, and tomorrow the little gray cells will rest until they are called upon once again to unravel the mysteries that human nature perpetually creates. Outside his window, London lay spread beneath the winter stars, its thousands upon thousands of people engaged in their ordinary lives, most of them unaware of the extraordinary conspiracy that had been unfolding in their midst, and which had now been brought to justice through the meticulous application of logic, patience, and an understanding of the human heart that few possessed in equal measure. And somewhere in a jail cell, Edward Carmichael sat alone with his thoughts, contemplating the manner in which his carefully constructed empire had crumbled, brought to nothing by a Belgian detective with an egg-shaped head and a peculiar obsession with the arrangement of chocolates. Justice, as Hercule Poirot had observed many times before, had a curious way of manifesting itself in the most unexpected of forms.